Наоборот. Чё? Чё как? Нормально? Нет. Нет. Спасибо. Спасибо, я думаю, что это... Да. А что толку-то? Наоборот, да, ладно. Ладно. Пышкин мопс. Здравствуйте. Кусок разности. Нет, не очень.
Хотите зарабатывать на бирже?
Will help you to get started with continuous integration for free. Every big thing starts small.
Изменится каждодневная жизнь большинства россиян. Уже с 1 июля расскажет Лев Пархоменко.
Крупнейшая в мире платежная система MasterCard запустила в России одноименную платформу MasterCash. Данная платформа с помощью искусственного интеллекта анализирует каждое изменение на фондовом рынке.
Почти 5 месяцев назад мы с Фладаром поиграли в X-Ray Multiplayer Extension. На самом деле модификация имеет довольно масштабные цели, но конкретно мы играли в режим оборона. Необходимо продержать...
Надо, на самом деле, это... О, да. Нет, не дадите. Ой, уходишь ты, что ли? Уходишь ты. Вот это и было самое главное.
We use our smartphones a lot, and there are a few mistakes that people make time after time, and these can be genuinely costly. So in this video we're going to go through them, and then how you can fix them. So the first one, it is so important to use the charger that comes with your smartphone. There's a bit of a misconception going around that if a charger fits your current smartphone, then therefore it must be the right one to use. This is wrong, and this can actually cause serious damage to you and your smartphone. So, taking the example of the recently released OnePlus 5, the bottom of the charger tells us that the phone is built to take 5 volts and 4 amps. Now, using a small little charger from eBay, with no real brand on it, this one says it supplies 5 volts, but with only 1 amp. Now, not only does this mean slower charging, but also a long-term damage to the ability of the battery to actually hold capacity. It's also worth bearing in mind that with very cheap chargers, they often don't even live up to what they say on the tin. But the other option, even taking a high-quality charger from another manufacturer, for example if I tried to use the Xiaomi Mi 6's charger with the OnePlus 5, I could still overload it. As you can see, this one supports 9 volts of output, and that's actually enough to short-circuit the OnePlus 5. It could cause the phone to break, or even worse, explode while charging. And don't forget, on top of all this, in most phone warranty clauses, if you do use a third-party charger, your warranty is automatically void. So the next, very important, use the Xiaomi Mi 6's charger with the OnePlus 5, I could still, not only does this mean slower charging, but also a long-term phone. So, taking the example of the recently released OnePlus 5, the bottom of the charger tells us that the phone is built to take 5 volts and 4 amps. Now, using a small little charger from eBay, with no real brand on it, this one says it supplies 5 volts, but with only 1 amp. Now, not only does this mean slower charging, but also a long-term damage to the ability of the battery to actually hold capacity. It's also worth bearing in mind that with very cheap chargers, they often don't even live up to what they say on the tin. But the other option, even taking a high-quality charger from another manufacturer, for example if I tried to use the Xiaomi Mi 6's charger with the OnePlus 5, I could still overload it. As you can see, this one supports 9 volts of output, and that's actually enough to short-circuit the OnePlus 5. It could cause the phone to break, or even worse, explode while charging. And don't forget, on top of all this, in most phone warranty clauses, if you do use a third-party charger, your warranty is automatically void. So the next very important flaw that I've seen people make on their smartphones is to completely ignore permissions. Now, whilst care has been taken, there are still malicious apps present on the Play Store and Apple's App Store. Your smartphone is valuable. It has everything on it. It has everything you type. It has all your passwords, all your contacts, all your social media, and your photos. And therefore, an application that can get inside of it is very powerful indeed. So my recommendation would be to, first of all, either stick to trusted developers, or either download Editor's Choice apps, or thoroughly inspect the permissions being requested. If it doesn't look like the permissions line up with what the app actually needs, it's worth holding off. It's worth asking people, getting third-party reviews, or even asking the developers themselves to see if they can justify it. So there was a recent survey that said up to 70% of people are sleeping next to their smartphone while it's still on. And that's actually okay, as long as you put the phone on airplane mode. And there are a few reasons for this, and the first and most obvious one is simply that keeping the phone on airplane mode uses less battery. You can then reach full charge first and use less energy in the charging process. But the second reason is that people are constantly being bombarded with messages and notifications, and having this buzzing going on and off intermittently in your sleep has been known to reduce the quality of it. Turning your phone on airplane mode stops any distractions and means you can genuinely wake up feeling a bit more refreshed. And the last reason, which is a little bit of a grey area, is that this reduces the amount of radiation. So considering your phone is going to be in close proximity to your head for up to 9 hours per night, it's probably a good idea just to put it on airplane mode just in case. So the next one, unless an application is actually misbehaving, don't manually close them. Now Android and iOS have developed to the point where you can multitask very efficiently. When you are not using an application, the operating system is basically taking a snapshot of it, using next to no energy in the background. The time and battery you can end up spending managing your applications and then waiting for them to reload when you've actually closed them can be greater than if you just left them alone. And this tends to be even more significant for games, which are generally more idle when not being used, but also take longer to load if you do close them and reopen them. So we've all been in a situation where we've got a low amount of battery, and we know we need to use our smartphones again in the next few hours. Well, the general recommendation is don't power the phone off. Now, powering the phone off does preserve battery when it's off, but what it does mean is that you're at some point going to have to power it back on again to reuse it. And powering the phone on is what really takes a lot of resources. Not only does the powering on itself really push your CPU and storage to the max, but for the first sort of 5 minutes or so after booting on your phone, a lot of the services that were previously closed will be starting to reopen, and again, this really hits the battery hard. So again, just put the phone on airplane mode and leave it on standby. So for any period of time from about 1 hour to about 5 hours, this will probably be a better option than shutting it down and powering it on. So guys, there we go. Those were 5 very important things worth always bearing in mind when using your smartphone. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to smash that subscribe button because that would really help me out. With that being said, I'm Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'm signing out.
Не можете достать денег на ремонт, на новую машину, на дорогую покупку? Возьмите кредит в Почта-банке со ставкой от 5,9% годовых. Оформите прямо сейчас. Совсем другой банк, Почта-банк.
Новая кнопка для тех, кто понял. На депозитах много не заработать. Мы поможем выбрать, во что выгодно вложиться. Установи приложение Тинькофф Инвестиции и получи акции на сумму до 30 тысяч рублей. Тинькофф. Он такой один.
Чем? Куда придешь? Че делаешь? Ну, сняшки. Куда идете? Не понял я. Мяу-мяу-мяу-мяу-мяу. Знаешь, нас это нет.
Welcome to the complete comparison of every Google smartphone ever, starting at the very inception of Android with the T-Mobile G1. This phone is actually a partnership between Google, HTC and T-Mobile, and for some perspective, it came out a whole year after the first iPhone. Google was already late to the smartphone game, and so in a way, the T-Mobile G1 had to be better, and sadly most would agree it wasn't quite. The packaging is a two-tiered affair. We're talking about an age when buying a smartphone was a massive deal. So in the top half, you're getting stuff like some ancient-looking earphones, as well as a mini USB cable, even before the micro USB that's on its way out now. There's also a T-Mobile pouch, and to be really honest, the bottom half is even wackier. T-Mobile G1 CD containing the user manual and some really interesting-looking stickers. You've got to remember, Google was designing this thing before they knew about the iPhone, and so it's built like a lot of the not-so-smartphones that came before, like the early Blackberries with the slide-out keyboard, and it shipped with Android 1.0 before Android versions even had nicknames. I also want to thank EasySkins for sponsoring this video, but we'll get to this. Google's first phone did a lot right, but their second smartphone was a big jump towards what we know today. I should clarify at this point, it took a long time before Google actually started building their own hardware, and so for their early smartphones, they instead nominated another manufacturer to build for them, in this case HTC. So inside this box, again, Google threw in a pouch, which was just a much more common way of protecting your phone back then. We still got that same mini USB cable, as well as a headset. This is much simpler packaging than last time. And one more thing, is a removable battery. Completely standard at the time. After their first phone, which had a lot of relics from the non-smart era, by the time this thing came around, the company had a much better idea of what the smartphone should be. So with the HTC Magic, they ditched the physical keyboard and went for a smoother, slimmer chassis, plus Android 1.5 Cupcake. This combination of it being more pocketable and having a better display meant that the phone made waves. Not as many waves.
Meow meow. Meow meow meow. Meow meow.
сражаться 8 волн против мутантов. Тогда это у нас так и не получилось. Но мы все же собрались снова и уже вчетвером посмотрим, удастся ли нам сегодня покорить этот режим. После просмотра не забудьте заценить видео ребят. У каждого из них в видосах есть уникальные моменты. Все ссылки в описании. Также, если это видео наберет 10 тысяч лайков, то я пойму, что данная тема вам интересна, и как-нибудь мы соберемся вместе снова и запишем для вас что-нибудь еще. Приятного просмотра! Я буду чувак с сажей на лице.
Я пожилой свободовец.
Ну что, поехали? Я готов.
Я тоже готов.
Давайте тогда какую-то тактику, да?
У всех в порядке, порядке стоим?
Ну я самый правый.
Первый Артур, потом Дима, потом какой-то чувак Пугачгу и Мануэль.
Ну все правильно.
Все верно. Добрый день, господа, с вами Фладар, Димастер. Да пугач, блин.
И кто-то это стопудово оставит.
Здорово, пацаны, с вами Фладар, Димастер.
Пугачгу.
Ну я Мануэль.
Так, все, короче.
Процесс пошел?
Матч начался.
Так, помним, да? А, кто куда будет бежать, если что? Я сказал, я блокпост буду.
Я беру ружье, все нормально. Аптечки еще иногда смотрите, они появляются.
Да.
Сначала самого. Возле палатки точно есть одна аптечка.
Он, короче, только пешком ходит.
РПГ я заметил, вот на том самом месте валяется, поэтому...
А, оно постоянно, кстати, валяется, ты прикинь?
Ну, я
ну, хорошо.
Артур, а у нас в прошлый раз такого не было?
А, не было, да, это, скорее всего, с апдейтами завезли.
Скорее всего, да. А разве есть на первой волне что?
Нет, на первой волне просто сейчас эти плоти будут, да, собаки.
Угу.
Можно
Вы из пистолетов отстреливаться, да?
Да, да.
Все нормально. А то у меня ружьишка имеется. И у
Я
Димастера
Тоже
тоже.
кто лутал на первой волне. Ничего.
О,
Ясно, я упал в шарку.
Спасибо, Мануэль, за слез.
Да он как-то, у него инерция жесткая, он как гонщик нелегальный.
и Димастер залез в РПГ.
Димастер,
Подождите,
ты...
спам, ты кто-то лутал, нет?
А ты, может,
Я
спавнишь? Все,
лутал,
лутали,
я
да.
все залутал, но там ничего нету.
Ну там ружье с самого начала спавнится, я его взял.
У меня просто там ничего, короче, нету с собой.
Димастер, мне кажется...
Да, блядь.
Да,
Ясно.
я так и знал.
Все, старт шикарный.
Да.
Сейчас еще друг друга перестреляем. Пошел процесс. Фиксирую впереди.
А вот за спиной.
Так, а может...
Так,
Ну,
одно,
я пойду на другой контейнер, потому что она слишком много на том.
Давай, давай.
Да.
Да нормально.
Да,
Зачем?
призываю.
Да ты куда лезешь?
Кстати,
Ну,
важно,
нормально,
что
там
позицию занял.
жарко лезет.
Все, процесс пошел.
Если
Мясо.
на возвышенностях сидеть, то проще потом, если что, рисать.
Ну да, убежать можно.
Кобан!
Кабаны.
Я Кобан скинул. Капец. Я первую.
Давай, прикрываем.
Кабаны, кстати, очень жирные.
Да ты...
У меня, кстати,
Кобаны вообще опасные.
возникает, что с
Они
каждым
их запрыгнули.
разом мутанты больше дамага наносят, или мне кажется?
Кабан застрял, все, нормально.
Лечусь.
Кабан гранта.
Так, вроде пока...
Как ты залез под текстуру?
А, да,
Бетон,
первая.
пацаны, бетон.
Фабиашин, ты живешь?
Я сдох.
Ясно.
Если тебе
Да, дайте, кто жив.
А кто раненый? Где? Фиксирую раненого, но я не знаю.
валяюсь.
Сейчас, ровно секунду.
Нам надо тогда кабанов
Все,
как-то.
бегу.
А, давай, ну
Я
тут тебе кабан лежит.
Прикрывайте.
Охренеть, а, ни хрена меня подкинул. Что? Как? А что у меня? У меня 0 хп.
Опять. А, все, это уже смерть. Ну это точно было фейк такси, серьезно. Я это
Нет,
знал.
подожди, у меня патроны закончились. У меня есть
Все
ружье.
нормально живем.
Терпим.
У меня вообще купа нет.
Патроны кончились, серьезно.
Так, у меня ружье, кстати. Все нормально. А подожди, не трогай его. А что делать-то?
Подожди, да нормально, давай.
Я могу Фабиашин залутать.
Все, нормально.
Вот, сейчас рейсимся.
Фабиашин, где тогда свой труп
Давай.
лутать?
Да, кстати, трупы здесь лежат.
Ну, я надеюсь, он не исчезнет.
Так, и чего? Я не
я
резался.
хотел. Блин, я Артуровское все подобрал.
В смысле, а чего он не резался? Откинь мне аптечку одну, меня что уж сейчас сдохну.
Сейчас.
Все, фиксируй.
Потратим
Да, в
возрождение.
смысле? Куда все делать?
Ну, я подобрал все, спасибо.
Так, по ящикам, пацаны.
Лутай дальний голубой ящик, есть обрез и патроны. Фигня.
Я на спавне
Блин, у
залутал.
меня патронов вообще нет.
А ты тут вообще ящик зеленый. А, в нем ничего, к сожалению. Палатка.
Нормально, я с ножом остался.
Забираю аптечку и РПГ.
Палатка пустая.
Ну, было-
Ну, это только вторая волна. У меня, конечно, есть обрез, но если кому-то надо, могу скинуть. Ну, давай обрез и 20 патронов тебе скину.
Да,
Хотя
да.
бы. Хотя бы, чтобы
Лавку
да.
обыскивали, да, уже?
Все, пошел процесс.
Все.
Возле палатки ДФМ, да?
Давайте в палатке, я это.
Вот зараза такая. Ты раненый? Его плоти половили. Илья, что он тоже повалил.
опять на метр.
Вот, я иду на помощь.
Я по Димастеру попал,
Если-
смачно.
А как возродить?
На F.
На F, там...
Удерживать надо, по-моему.
Найти хитбокс, так сказать.
Я пока бегаю от собак. Тут жизнь какая-то.
Ну все ясно.
dropshipping. Bon, vendre de la...
U-Track, project tracker and knowledge base in one. Server or cloud, U-Track your way. Get it for free now.
Samsung and Google, in theory at least, should be best friends. Samsung is the dominant seller of Android phones. They're putting Google's operating system in the hands of hundreds of millions, and Google is giving Samsung the tools to make them. But I'm not even exaggerating when I say this. These two companies despise each other. You might have noticed if you've ever tried to buy a Samsung phone that this company has tried to remove every trace of it actually being run on Google software. They've used a different design direction, different color palettes, and more importantly, different apps. They want you to use Samsung's calendar, Samsung's internet browser, Samsung's notes, all instead of Google's alternatives. Plus, in areas where Samsung just can't compete with Google, they've partnered up with Microsoft. Instead of pushing Google Docs, they push Microsoft Word. Instead of backing your photos up to Google Drive, they use the much less popular Microsoft OneDrive. And actually, just recently with the Note 20 series of phones, they've doubled down on this partnership. Samsung went out of their way to show how their phones would work great with Microsoft's xCloud game streaming service, which is a massive blow to Google considering that they are also working on their own game streaming platform, Stadia. I could go on about instances of this all day. Google developed Android TV, Samsung went, we're good, we're going to make our own smart TV OS. Google introduced Daydream VR, Samsung focused on their own, Gear VR. And probably the biggest blow was when Google unveiled their new operating system for smartwatches, and Samsung even used it for a bit, only then to announce that they were creating their own OS and that they were going to make all future watches based on that. So you get the idea. Samsung is doing everything in their power to distance themselves as much as possible from Google. And honestly, it's heartbreaking. If these two companies put their heads together, they would be unstoppable. I genuinely think that Samsung makes the best phone hardware out there. There's very little that rivals the feel and the look of their latest Note 20 Ultra. But Google makes the best Android software. Their Pixel 4a is a perfect example of this. A phone with pretty crummy hardware, all things considered, but it's still an amazing phone, just thanks to its intelligence. Put Google software on Samsung hardware, and you've got a potent iPhone rival. So, why the beef? Why is there no love lost between these two companies? Well, I would argue it's because with tech, hardware is getting good. Generally speaking, in 2020, you could buy a good smartphone and it'll probably last you 4 years. Buy a good computer, it could last you 8. Pretty much all signs point towards the majority of future profits being from software and services, as opposed to just selling the hardware itself. Because for a lot of people, the hardware they already have is good enough. Now, this is a problem for Samsung, because they've always really been a hardware company. They make great screens and beautiful designs, but to really ensure future profits, Samsung wants to be your health tracker, your payment provider, your hub for services. So, Google, who more or less wants the same thing, is actually Samsung's biggest and closest competitor. Oh, and if you're enjoying this video, by the way, a sub to the channel would be extraordinary. If you're wondering why Samsung is so keen on partnering up with Microsoft, it's because both of those companies have the same objective: to beat Google. Microsoft has famously fought Google on the Windows front, trying to push its own Microsoft Edge browser over Chrome, and Bing as the default search engine instead of Google Search, plus the whole Microsoft Office versus Google's Office suite of apps.